All right. Good afternoon. Thank you for coming. We'll be talking today about Chapter 11 in our book, which is study skills and the other sort of requisite skills students need in order to do well. I think probably this area really is a catch-all area for our focus topic today, which I've alluded to some in other chapters, but I think really impacts the content of Chapter 11 maybe more than it does the content in some other things that we've talked about. And that is really our focus topic today is what do you think I mean if I say schools discriminate against students from low SES backgrounds, and oftentimes those who have a disability label. We usually think about school discrimination as pertaining to children who were in a certain ethnic group or have a religious affiliation. We think about gender discrimination and bias against maybe women or men, or culture bias that kids encounter in the schools because they have membership in a minority ethnic group. But I'd like for you to think about some other forms of discrimination in the school, and forms of discrimination that are really much more subtle, because I think by now most people who want to be teachers have really come to terms with the fact that they're delighted to teach in multi-ethnic environments. And I think most teachers really believe that having children from different religions and different ethnicities that speak different languages is really a desirable feature in today's school system. I think that most teachers enjoy celebrating the diversity, and I see lots of signs of this when I go into schools. I see culture fairs, and I see ethnic celebrations that have to do with different religions around the world, many of which are represented in the city of Houston, and certainly oftentimes many of these different religions or ethnicities or languages or whatever are represented in the same classroom of students at the same time. So I think we've come a long way in terms of our ability as teachers to really get excited about these sort of demographic differences that kids bring to school. And of course, while I think that's a good thing, I don't necessarily think that puts an end to all the discrimination that goes on in school. I really think that schools do discriminate against children who are poor, and also sometimes children who have a disability. Not advertently, but inadvertently, whether they intend to or not, because we do things like assign homework, and we assign study skills, and we have test-taking requirements and exigencies for evaluating children that are very, very difficult for children who are low achievers and children from often low SES backgrounds to compete on, and to compete favorably with youngsters who come to school with different background experiences, because they may have membership in the middle or upper class and may had advantages in preschools and resources in the home, books in the home, and these kinds of things that make them more competitive when it comes to school activities, and also has prepared them with better background experiences to compete on school activities. There's another thing I want to talk about with regard to this type of discrimination, though, and that is teacher expectations. We have an abundance of empirical evidence now that indicates that when you look at large samples of teachers, that's not necessarily anyone sitting in this room, but it's certainly worth your considering whether or not you represent the subjects in these studies. But when we look at wide samples of teacher behavior and analyze teacher behavior empirically, what we find is that teachers do relate differently to youngsters who are poor. We have expectations about school oftentimes that are very well grounded in the middle class. We expect, for example, that children are neat and clean. We have a value that represents that in school, and we tend to relate differently to children who aren't neat and clean. We know from sound empirical evidence that there are differences in the way even well-intentioned teachers relate to children who don't speak standard English. The interactions between teachers and children who speak standard English and children who don't speak standard English have been analyzed and studied to a wide extent. And what we have found is that teachers do, in fact, relate differently to students who don't speak standard English. We tend to discount the contributions of children who don't represent their language well. In fact, one of the attributes we have for teachers for this same reason, you'll notice on your professional attributes form that you encounter when you start the Quest program, that we expect teachers to have effective written and oral communication skills. We consider this an essential skill for teaching because people make judgments about others based on the way they speak. So we know that sometimes teachers do this in classrooms too, and they tend to devalue and discount the contributions of youngsters who don't speak standard English. We know that there is a difference in the way teachers relate to boys and girls. And it doesn't make any difference if the teachers are male or female. We know there's a difference in the way teachers relate to high achievers and low achievers. When a high achiever answers a test question incorrectly or a discussion question incorrectly, you know what the teacher tends to do? Say, tell me more. Now what? Now this. The teacher tends to rephrase the response of a higher achieving student so that that student ends up making a successful response to that question. However, if a low achieving student gives the same answer, the teacher says, well, that's, yeah, but what else? So we discount, we have expectations sometimes about children based on their economic status, their language facility, their history of high or low achievement. And sometimes these things influence the way we relate to them, and it also influences the extent to which they are able to compete with middle-class peers on lots of the expectations in school, like homework expectations and study skills and test-taking expectations and these kinds of things. So we're going to examine some of these phenomenon today and talk about some of the things that we can do to level the playing field for youngsters who are low achievers. And I know that some of you in here have children, but for those of you who don't have children, I'm going to give you just one little kernel fact to carry forth with you for the rest of your life. And that is that it costs a lot of money for your child to have a free and appropriate public education. It costs a lot of money. I am so sorry that I did not keep a running ledger of all the money it cost me to provide my children with a free and appropriate public education. But for those of you who do not have children in the public schools yet, I cannot tell you how many $2 t-shirts that you're going to pay $10 for because they have the school logo on there, and you don't want your child to be the only one on the field trip without the school t-shirt with the school logo. I can't tell you how many $2 books that you could have gotten at a garage sale for 25 cents that you will spend $12.95 for because they're at the book fair. And if your child doesn't have money, he has to stay in the room all by himself while everybody else goes to shop. I can't tell you how many things of this nature that I have bought that my children neither wanted or needed because I didn't want them to be singled out as the child who had to stay home on the field trip, or the child who couldn't join the others, or the child who didn't have the right costume to wear at the right time, the right place. It goes on forever. From Go Texan Day, I can remember going from shop to shop trying to find a pair of cowboy boots that I could afford to pay so that my children could go be cowboys on Go Texan Day. The list goes on forever. And certainly we do have these things in place, and you're going to encounter this as teachers in the system. Chapter 11 specifically addresses the issue of study skills, and we really think about study skills as being tools for learning or behaviors necessary to enable children to become self-sufficient at learning whatever it is that they need to learn. And we know that students with disabilities typically do not have very good study skills, and they don't have very good learning strategies, and they experience difficulty when they try to undertake academic tasks independently. And as a result of that, schools and teachers have started really imparting a curriculum based on teaching study skills to children who are low achievers and those who are labeled with a disability if they need such a program. Study skills really are an example of the type of skills that I've talked about earlier that really youngsters who are high achievers don't necessarily need. Kids who are high achievers achieve these skills and abilities vicariously. They figure out how to outline a chapter. They figure out how to take notes. They figure out how to study for a test. Once you teach them to read, they figure out the strategies that are necessary for learning what they need to learn and knowing what they need to know. Remember, we were talking last week about meta-memory and this sort of thing, how kids figure out on their own how to remember things. But this chapter is sort of a discussion of what we were talking about last week with regard to memory, because oftentimes youngsters who are low achievers don't figure out how to learn these things on their own, and there may be a motivational component involved. They may not be quite as motivated to learn this as someone else might be. Another issue we have oftentimes with children who are low achievers are organizational skills. I know that you all have been out in the schools some. Has anybody in here been in like a third grade classroom? Upper grade. You were in the third grade? Could you tell in there from looking at the kids from the time you were there who the low achiever was? Did you notice anything about that child's desk?
By itself.
Huh?
It was by itself.
The child's desk was by itself?
And messy.
Huh?
And messy.
And messy. Almost invariably, when you look inside the desks of children who are low achievers, what you see looking back at you is a rat's nest. I mean, it is a mess. Papers and books and workbooks and things wadded and stuffed in there, and they can't find anything. No wonder they're disorganized about their learning activities. They're disorganized about their personal activities. And so organizational skills is really a major hurdle that we have to overcome with kids. Maybe you have noticed yourself, I cannot function in a disorganized environment. When my environment, and my bar is low where keeping house is concerned. I can tell you it is not my priority. Housekeeping is not my priority. But when things in my house get in a disarray, I don't care kind of if it's just a little dusty and dirty. That works for me. Dusty and dirty works for me. What doesn't work for me is disorganized. Because when my house gets disorganized, I forget things. I forget to pay bills. I forget to take the things with me that I need for work because they're not where they go, or they're where they go, but they're in such a mess of clutter that I don't see them when I'm on my way to go where I'm going. So I'm a person who doesn't function very well in a disorganized environment, and most children who are low achievers don't function very well in a disorganized environment either. So one of the things that we have to help them do is adopt a system of personal organization and management. They need to learn self-management so that they can understand and know what the class schedule is on a daily, weekly, and monthly basis, what organization they need to put together when they go home every day to make sure that they have what they need to complete their homework. It doesn't make any difference in the world if they have everything they need to do their homework at home. If they haven't written down what they're supposed to do, it's not going to be done when they come back. So there are some things that we can do as teachers that help children who are low achievers, but also don't do any harm for kids who are high achievers. One of those is post and review all the class times and schedules so that kids know where they're supposed to go and when they're supposed to be there. And if they don't know that, they will have something to look at to tell them where to go. They will have a prompt, if you will, that will remind them where they need to be, and that prompt or calendar or list of activities and the times associated with it needs to be in the same place every day and current every day, so that when they don't know where to go, they have a place to find out. Children, particularly children who are low achievers, often are very self-conscious about not knowing what they need to know. So rather than ask and be identified as the youngster who doesn't know, they'll simply do nothing and miss being where they are supposed to be. They really typify oftentimes the expression, that you can keep your mouth and be closed and be assumed a fool, or open your mouth and remove all doubt. And they oftentimes will follow the latter philosophy and keep their mouths closed so that nobody knows that they don't know what they think everybody else knows. And oftentimes, of course, many of the other children don't know either. But in any event, posting and reviewing the class schedule and where kids are supposed to be and when they're supposed to be there is often helpful. It's important if all grade levels follow systematic schedules so that when students get the schedule down, it's understandable to them and it's something that they can depend on. At the beginning of a new semester, particularly, the teachers need to acquaint the children with any changes that have taken place in the schedule. How do they locate the rooms they're supposed to go to? If they don't know the school layout, are they sure? Children who are cognitively slowed often have a great deal of difficulty with spatial relations. So they may not be able to deduce that room 17 is the room next door to room 15 on one side and room 19 on the other side. They may not have any idea how to identify from a field of possibilities where room 15 is. So this is something they may have to be shown when they are teachers because they may be too embarrassed to ask. They may also have a great deal of difficulty with their lockers. Children who have been marginal achievers in elementary school often go down, sink like a rock when they get to middle school for these very things that we've been talking about in the last 10 minutes that seem so obvious. Post a schedule, know where to go, show the kids where they're supposed to be. That seems so obvious. Nevertheless, many children are lost and fall through the cracks because this sort of thing is not provided for them and they can't figure it out on their own. When a child goes to middle school, he is suddenly required to have all of his things in a central location and move to 7 or 8 different places throughout the course of the day. This is a big adjustment from being in an elementary classroom and having all of your things in a desk. Now you couple this with the fact that years ago when I was in school, we didn't start that. All students, when I went to school, were in a self-contained 6th grade classroom. That's the way it was. And then in 7th grade, you went to middle school and were expected to have a locker and change classes. Now we routinely, and certainly in virtually all schools that I know about in Houston, kids go to middle school in the 6th grade and have that model of having a social studies teacher, a math teacher, an English teacher, a science teacher, and so on and so forth. So we're now requiring children to do in the 6th grade what we used to require them in the 7th grade to do. But in addition to that, many elementary schools are departmentalized. How many of you went to a departmentalized elementary school where you had one teacher for English and another teacher for math, or several of you did? Well, it is a very widespread model now. It's not in every district, but many of our local area districts follow that model where there are team teachers in the 3rd grade, as early as the 3rd grade. You may be breaking children up with a reading, language arts, and social studies teacher in the morning and a math and science teacher in the afternoon. And then, of course, the teachers flop classes at noon. Well, I don't know that that model is necessarily harmful. It certainly has some advantages for some youngsters, and it has advantages for some teachers. It also has the advantage that you have 2 teachers, so the chances of your getting along with one of them or liking one of them or having one especially good one may be embellished. But there's also a downside to that because you are likely to have to adjust to 2 different teaching learning styles, 2 different sets of expectations, and in some cases even 2 different rooms. Under some of these models, the teachers change rooms, but under some of the models, the students change rooms. So we're really requiring children to have these organizational and developmental skills much earlier in life than we have before. And that's a fine thing for many of the youngsters who are well organized and independent and highly motivated. But it may be problematic for other youngsters who are not as efficient and effective at doing school, and also not as good at figuring out how to keep up with their stuff, stay organized, and get from one place to another. Also, some students don't handle change well. I mean, we have kids who when things change, I mean, we have big kids who don't handle change well. I mean, lots of people don't like change. They like it. I kind of like things the way they are myself. Know exactly what to expect. Figure out what works. Don't have to try too many different things. There's a real safety net in knowing what to expect, right? I kind of like it. Change for change's sake is not too good for me. I can do without it. But lots of kids don't adjust well to change. With some of the disability labels like autism and TBI, change is really the ability to adapt to change may be a symptom of the disorder. But even with many normal and many low achieving children, changes such as the substitute being assigned to the class can be problematic for children. Now then, one of the things your book recommends is that students have daily, weekly, and monthly planners. And I think that that is a wonderful idea, but I want to give you some recommendations with regard to planners if you're going to have them for your students. Planners are just a little bit like punishment. They really work best for the people that don't need them, if you follow me. Probably if you give everybody in your class a planner, without making any meaningful changes in the way you do business in your classroom, what you're going to find is the kids who are already organized love them and depend on them highly and use them all the time. The kids who are disorganized and all over the place can't ever find them. So if you are going to use planners, and I would encourage and recommend you to do so, you have to follow through with making use of the planner a routine part of your day. Your day has to start with getting out your planner and turning it to the next page and keeping it a certain space on your desk. And your lessons have to end with write in your planner your math assignment for today, or write in your planner what you need to do to turn in. And when you get to reading, you need to redirect everybody to the planner and enter your reading homework for the night. Then when you get ready to go home that day, you have to refer everyone to their planners and say, okay, for your math homework, you're going to need this and this. Check off those things on your planner and put them in your book bag, and so on and so forth. You can't just expect to give low-achieving kids planners and think they'll work. I used to do that with my own kids, thinking that somehow by osmosis, all the information that they would need in school was going to jump from the teacher's mouth into their planners and appear in their book bags when they came home. And of course, it didn't make any difference if the planner was a paper planner, an electronic planner, or anything else. I wasn't there to provide the structure for them to really make effective use of their planners, and there wasn't anyone in those environments that structured that procedure for them. So if you're going to depend on planners, they are a wonderful tool, and I think they're a great life learning experience for kids. I certainly could not make it from day to day without a planner and a calendar and whatever is written on it. You may give me your phone number 10,000 times, but unless you watch me write it into your planner, I'm not going to have it. I never miss anything on my planner because I am in the habit of looking at it every day. So the most important thing in making sure that I'm dependable in my relationship with you is getting on my planner, because once you're there, you're home free. And actually, I have learned that about myself, so I'm fairly conscientious now of trying not to embarrass myself. So when people give me a number, I make a point to write it in my planner right away before I forget. I write it in my planner and throw away that business card, which is of no practical use for me whatsoever. I'd be just like the child with the learning disability if I tried to keep up with a whole Rolodex full of planners. I can just imagine a whole sitcom based on me trying to keep up with a Rolodex full of that stuff. I've also learned that electronic planners don't work for me. They might work for you, but they don't work for me. A good old concrete pencil and paper planner works best for me. Your students may be motivated by an electronic planner, and they're very inexpensive now. And of course, they don't take up very much room. Of course, they're hard to find because they're not very big. When they get lost, it's a problem. But electronic planners may be motivating for them. But to make efficient use of planners for kids, you've got to structure that as a routine part of your day. The parent has to know about the planner, the parent has to see the planner and check things off in the planner and make certain that the planner gets back to school. So these kinds of things are not an end in and of themselves. They're a boilerplate for increasing the organizational effectiveness of what children do in school. Now, another thing that is important for children is task analysis. A lot of the things that we'll be talking about today, like listening skills and study skills and test-taking skills, are very conducive to task analysis. I don't remember, have we ever talked about task analysis in here before? I don't think it's come up in a previous chapter, but there's a lot about task analysis. This is really a strategy that was devised for special education, but it's wonderful for kids or adults or anybody who's trying to master a complex set of procedures. Task analysis was invented by a guy who maintained that you could teach anything to anybody if you broke it down into the smallest incremental parts possible and taught one part at a time. I'll give you an example. Shoe tying is a very complex behavior. Can you remember being a little kid and learning to tie your shoes, or did y'all all have Velcro shoes? I don't believe my children can tie their shoes yet. Well, yeah, they had to play soccer. I guess that's what motivated them to learn to tie their shoes. But when I was a child, of course, all shoes that you wore to school had laces, and you had to learn to tie them. And I thought my poor daddy was going to have a meltdown trying to teach me to tie my shoes, you know, which I could not seem to be. Well, actually, I think my mother had already melted down and turned that activity over to my poor father, who finally taught me to tie my shoes because he was so big I could sit in his lap and he could reach around me and tie my shoes. And he did finally teach me. But I have thought so many times in my adult life how easy his life would have been had he learned task analysis, because it's so much easier to learn to teach a child to tie his or her shoes over the course of several days if you start with the little bitty tasks that are involved in shoe tying and add one on each day. This is how we teach mentally retarded youngsters to tie their shoes. You would never be able to teach them that whole procedure in one setting like my poor daddy finally was able to teach me by doing it over and over and over and over and over and over and over with great frustration. But when you break the task down into its incremental parts, all the child has to do first is pick up the lace and make a bow with your right hand. That's all he has to do the first day. And then you bring the bow around and you tie the shoe. So all he has to practice that first day is making a bow with his right hand. Once that step is fully learned, then the child learns make the bow and bring the other strap around your thumb. Then you learn the next step to make a bow out of the other and pull it through and so on and so forth. So we break shoe tying. I'd have to sit down. I do it so routinely now, I'd have to sit down and actually tie shoelaces in order to see how many incremental steps we would need. But we teach shoe tying to very young children and to children who are cognitively slowed using task analysis, because we can teach them so many more complex tasks by teaching them one step at a time and letting them build on each step and each step and each step. We do this with shirts, putting on your shirt and putting on your pants and putting on your socks is something we teach children. You wouldn't think there'd be so much involved in putting on socks, would you? But it's a hard activity for a child who's moderately to severely mentally retarded. It's very complex. How do you get that thing on your foot without the heel sticking up over the arch of your foot? The first thing you do is put the heel on the bottom. That's step number one. Step number two is to put your thumbs inside your sock. Step number three is to gather your sock up. And then you put your sock on your toe and pull it up. But these tasks are almost impossible to teach youngsters if you try to teach them the whole operation at one time, or if you leave out the fact that it's important for them to get their thumbs in the hole. Have you all ever seen the activity of having one child make a peanut butter sandwich with following the directions of another child? Well, it's hilarious. I mean, there is peanut butter and bread everywhere. I'll see if I can't give you a little description about how it goes, but Basically, you have one child stand up in front of a desk with the peanut butter here, the jelly here, and the bread here. And then you have another child who's not looking, who's standing behind a blackboard, telling this child how to make a peanut butter sandwich. But the only thing the child can do who's making the sandwich is exactly what he's told to do. So if the child behind the screen says, okay, put the peanut butter on the bread, what happens? The jar of peanut butter ends up on top of the bag of bread, because that isn't really the first thing you do. The first thing you do is take the lid off of the peanut butter. Well, I guess the first thing you do is take out a piece of bread, right? The next thing you do maybe is take out the lid off the peanut butter. And the next thing, and of course about this time they forget the sequence again and they say, now get out some peanut butter. And so in the hand goes to get out the peanut butter. Well, that isn't really correct. What you need to tell the child to do is pick up a knife and put that in the peanut butter. But when you see children follow these steps, you can really, and what a big mess it is if you don't give accurate directions and you don't follow accurate directions, you can really get their attention over how important it is to listen and follow directions. Yes, Lee?
When I was observing in the schools,
Two visits, both of these were illustrated. They were doing what they called they had a peanut butter and pickles project. And the teacher was explaining to the children how to do a peanut butter and jelly sandwich one step at a time. And they were all sitting around her, and they had plates with plastic knives, and she had handed them, the piece of bread and the peanut butter, and they had put the peanut butter on the plates, and she was giving them a blow-by-blow description as to what that they were to do, so that the peanut butter actually ended up on the bread with the jelly on top, and the other one. It was one step at a time. And then with the shoes, I was with the visually impaired, the children that were visually impaired, and she had put. I thought this was very creative. She had put shoelaces on the top of a box. They were different textures. One was flat, one was round, and they were different colors for the kids that had a little bit of vision. And she did the same thing, exactly what you were saying. She explained to them one step at a time how to tie those shoelaces. They did it on the box and then did it on their shoes.
Well, we teach children that about their buttoning their shirts too. Before you teach them to button their own shirts like this, you teach them to button a shirt on a board. Right. You know, you have two halves of a shirt nailed to a board, and then they just meet, and the children practice that fine motor coordination down here, because it's easier to do it there than it is in front of you. But the idea is the same with all of it, and that is that first of all, you have to give explicit directions that really express verbatim what you want done. And also for the children, how important it is to follow the directions, because they can see what goes wrong if they don't follow the directions for a peanut butter sandwich, but they don't necessarily see so clearly what happens when they don't follow the directions for executing a math equation. Do you see what I'm saying? And then also the notion that by breaking these down in step-by-step things in task analysis, if they are not able, if your little children with low vision are not able to tie the laces on, you can see what step breaks down, and require them to pick up to do this, and then teach the skill that they're doing incorrectly with some sort of a mnemonic that will help them remember to include that step or phrase it right or whatever. But in any event, task analysis is such a process for taking a large task or assignment and breaking it up into incremental parts, and teaching each one of these subcomponents, and then ultimately having the task analysis put together so that the child executes the entire task in its entirety. And this can be done on anything from dressing himself to long division. And is very, very effective. And it starts by really identifying the skill you want to teach, breaking it down into incremental parts, teaching each step in the sequence, beginning with the first and moving to the end. And then, of course, if this is an unmotivating task that you're teaching, you may need to build in a reinforcement component when each child masters the task. Now, what we've been talking about so far are tasks that are taught using a forward chain. In other words, you break these tasks down into the different aspects, which are links of a chain, and you teach a first chain first, such as picking up the shoelace and making a loop. Well, some tasks are more conducive to being taught using a backward chain. And when we use a backward chain, we really start with the last step, teach the last step first, and then the last step and the next to the last step. And you would do this if you were teaching a task that the completion of which was very reinforcing. For example, if you were teaching a child to eat soup, you would start using a backward chain. And the reason why, well, why would you? What's the last step in teaching a child to eat soup? Huh? She said slurping, but swallowing it, eating it, you know, the reinforcing part's getting it in your mouth, right? So you wouldn't want the child to have to learn to pick up the spoon, to lift the spoon, to put it over the soup, to put it in the soup, to fill the spoon, to lift it up to your mouth, to put it in your mouth, to turn the spoon over, when you could do all of those things and just teach the child to turn the spoon over and swallow. Then, after a certain amount of times, he would have to lift the spoon himself and put it in his mouth and swallow. Then he would have to fill the spoon and lift it and put it in his mouth. And ultimately, of course, the child would have to sit down at the table, put a napkin in his lap, pick up his spoon, put the spoon in the soup, lift the spoon without spilling, put it in his mouth, and so on and so forth. But that particular chain would be taught from a backward direction because it's eating the soup that's so reinforcing. Actually, some people teach shoe tying from a backward chain too, because it's so much fun to pull the bow shut. But you can teach shoe tying from a backward chain or a forward chain, either one. It doesn't make a whole lot of a difference on shoe tying, but it makes a big difference in soup because you're getting the motivating part, the motivation taken care of first. Now, we refer to task analysis really as errorless learning because the whole point of task analysis is that it assures that the teacher breaks the steps in small enough steps that they can be learned, and reinforcement is provided after every success experience, and so there's very little opportunity for the student to get discouraged because he fails at the task. And with many of these youngsters who have become very discouraged in school and very apathetic about their performance in school, it's wonderful for them to have an opportunity to learn that when they do what's expected of them, meet the demands of the requirement, great things happen to them in return. And so that's really what task analysis is all about. Now I have a question for you, and that is, how much homework do you think is a reasonable amount for a child to accomplish on a weekday? Write down, just everybody write down a number about how much homework do you think is a reasonable amount for students to accomplish in one day? How many people chose 30 minutes? 1. How many people chose an hour? 7. Okay. How many people chose 2 hours? 3 hours. So most people thought, did anybody choose anything else? So you think an hour is the right amount of homework, do you? How much homework do you think the average middle school student has? Many of you are going to be teachers in middle school. How many hours of homework a day do you think the average middle school student has? Huh? You think 3 or 4 hours? Yes?
I tutor a little girl who's in 3rd grade, and she only does like 30 minutes of homework a night. If that. I don't know if she just doesn't, if she does it during the day, if they don't do a lot of activities, or I don't know what. But she hardly ever has homework, so I always have to bring activities for her to do.
She said that she tutors a 3rd grader who only has 30 minutes of homework a day. There are several factors involved in that, and that is that. And some of the other students said, well, yes, but that's 3rd grade, you know, not middle school, and that's part of it. I think we have a tendency in schools to increase the demands of homework. The older the children get, the more homework is required of them if they're going to be successful. But that is really a loaded question. How many hours of homework do you think a student has every night? Because that depends on lots and lots of factors. First of all, your little girl, your little 3rd grader, may be completing a number of her homework assignments while she's in school. School often becomes a situation where you work on this for 20 minutes in class, and then you've got to finish what is left after school. I want y'all to think about this because this is important. Well, another factor in 30 minutes is how much can you get done in 30 minutes? If you perceive the task is easy and it really is just practice for you, then you can probably do quite a few problems or 2 or 3 worksheets if you're in the 3rd grade in 30 minutes. For a child who isn't very academically able and really doesn't understand the assignment very well, what could be a 30-minute assignment for your little girl might be a 2-hour assignment for somebody else.
Right. Well, it's usually just like one worksheet, but she has a lot of, problems with her math and stuff like that. So on one worksheet is 4 problems. On one worksheet is like 4 problems. So we do that, and it takes about 30 minutes. And it's just one little word problem for each, and it's multiple choice. So, and then maybe she does spelling or something for 5 minutes, but I don't know, it seems like maybe they have a lot of free time during the day, and that's when she does it, and then she brings it home, and I'll check over it the days that I meet with her.
Well, a lot of teachers follow the model that says work on this 20 minutes, and if you're not through, finish it for homework. And I really hate that model, because the truth is that model punishes, once again, the children who are the least efficient learners. Oftentimes, the kids in your classroom who can't do their homework are the same ones who don't get finished in class. And they're not very good at this, and they may not have very much help doing it at home, and they may be slower at it than everybody else, yet they're the ones who end up taking it all home. And I actually hate homework myself. I hated it when I was a child. I always went real fast, so I got everything done. I thought that's why God gave you a locker, is that's where your books were supposed to be at night. So I wasn't very good at doing homework. I had quite a shock when I came to college and they didn't give me a locker, and they expected me to do things at night. I thought, how unreasonable. And I still don't do homework. I often stay here till 5 or 6 o'clock at night, but I don't do homework. I grew up with a mother who did homework every night. My mother taught 6th grade, and she graded papers every night till she went to bed. And I made up my mind when I got big I wasn't going to do homework. And my own opinion is what we call adults who do lots of homework in the evenings and weekends is what? Workaholics. That's my opinion. Other people may call them something else, but I think that we are very concerned as a society about people who work all day every day and bring home their work and work in the evenings and work on the weekends. We know that this work ethic interferes with their interpersonal relationships and interferes with their spending time with their families and doing other kinds of things that may be very, very important in the overall course of their lives. Yet they work. And so I don't really think that homework is great training for real life experiences. I think that we need to teach people to work and work hard and complete their work in a reasonable amount of time and then take time to enjoy relationships and recreational activities and get plenty of rest. We hear all about the society, you know. People are sleep deprived, and it's caused sleep deprivation is causing society this amount, and many of our weight factors, eating disorders, are a result of sleep deprivation, and so on and so on. And so I think it's important to teach kids to work hard and do quality work in a reasonable amount of time, and then put that aside and do other kinds of things. But I mean, that makes me a minority of one. In all probability, when you go to school and get a job, you will be expected and required to assign a certain amount of homework. And I just want to encourage you to think about the type of homework that you assign, and think about the model that you use for assigning homework, because if you become a teacher who says, okay, well, we'll work 20 minutes on this and finish it at home. You work 20 minutes on this and finish it at home. Work 20 minutes and finish this at home. The children who are the most burdened by homework are those who are the least able and capable to do it on their own.
Well, she comes home and I meet with her every Monday, and I ask her what we need to do for her homework, and she says that the teacher gives them a worksheet out of their math book, but she doesn't know how to do it. And I said, well, you don't know what this division is or this multiplication? She says, well, she hasn't taught it to us. And I don't really understand how the teacher could assign that homework and expect them to do it at home if the teacher's not there to answer questions that they have. I mean, not every child has a free tutor like I'm doing for this girl.
Well, I know it. That is true, and it is a problem. That's one of the reasons we follow the lesson cycle that we follow in here, that you do a guided practice so that you see that your children are able to execute these activities before you send them home with the activity. But the teacher may think she's taught that activity, but the little girl may think she hasn't learned it yet. It may also be easier for you to help her than it is for her to figure it out on her own. Some of that might be an attention-getting device. She may think you're young and you're cute and she loves your attention and she likes for you to sit with her and do these things. So sometimes not knowing can be very reinforcing, just like in getting teacher attention. Teacher, I don't, help me, I don't know it. Well, there's a payoff in not knowing it. And so we end up with children who have learned helplessness. But this is a good experience for you to see how unproductive homework can be. And I want to tell you, you say you're a free tutor, but many youngsters with working parents have paid tutors, who help them after school. And I know why. When my children were in elementary school, I went home every day at 3:30. And help them with their homework. And then oftentimes I came back to work. I had evening classes and other things, but I went home in the daytime, because if I waited till I got home from work, I was so tired and the kids were so tired, it ended up in being a scream fest to get them to do their homework. And it often is a very contentious thing with children and families, and it's very divisive for families, screaming at one another. Have you done your homework? I have done my homework. Do your homework. Not, wait a minute. You know, and if they spend the entire time, mothers spend the entire time between the time they get home from work till the time everybody goes to bed, screaming at kids about homework that usually never gets done. So I don't know. I think it interferes with relationships. I really don't like homework very well. And the last empirical evidence that I read indicated that there was not a very significant relationship between achievement and the amount of homework assigned, particularly for children in the earlier grades. So maybe high school homework may promote a higher level of achievement, but for youngsters in the elementary grades, you know, it really doesn't, and I think it's often more a measure of how much the parents can do than how much the children can do, because it's often very, very difficult for children to do homework if they don't have parents who can help them. And low SES children often don't have parents who can help them. Many times their parents have not been successful in school and are not high achievers in school and are not literate in English, and they don't know how to help them with their homework. So it becomes a very discriminatory thing for the youngsters who are the low achievers, and also those who are from family situations that are not particularly supportive where homework is concerned for one reason or the next. We talked a little bit about the reality of homework, but there are also some facts about homework that I think are things that you need to become more familiar with over time. And one of those is that the purpose of homework is really to develop fluency with information that's taught in school. Just like you mentioned, oftentimes kids go home, they don't know how to do their homework. For this, as well as other reasons, one of the facts is that students with disabilities are over twice as likely to have difficulty completing their homework as their more academically able counterparts. And I think that's an important consideration for you to think about. We know from empirical evidence that children with disabilities have over twice as many difficulties in this area as others do. It is for this reason that they may need to have their homework reduced in size and scope, so that they do not require so much more time to complete these activities than other children do. We talked a little bit earlier about the notion of getting a planner for your students. If you do, certainly a homework record or an assignment roster is one of the things that need to be included in that planner. And there also needs to be a provision for the teacher to indicate in there with certainty that the child has included all of the aspects of the assignment, and for the parent to sign off that the student did it in a timely fashion. Now, your book gives some strategies for teachers that facilitate homework completion. One of them is to make absolutely sure that there are clear and concise directions for completing the assignments. If children don't know what they are supposed to do, they're certainly not going to be very likely to do it. They have to have all the materials necessary to complete each assignment. Oftentimes these have to be either repeated or double-checked to make sure that the child has a record of what he needs to do. If there are areas that you anticipate difficulty, these need additional clarifications or a resource available so that when children go home, they can check. Many teachers now have a website, so their homework is posted every day on the website. Or they have questions and answers, and we have homework assistance and all kinds of things. But there needs to be a resource for a child who is stumped to be able to get help. There needs to be a regular time in the school day that you distribute these homework assignments and that you collect them. If we don't evaluate homework in some way or reward students for completing it, it's not likely that it will get done. But how do you feel about grading, giving kids grades for bringing their homework back? See, I don't really think that's the purpose of assessment. There are students who fail grades, who pass all their tests, but fail a subject because they didn't bring their homework. We're going to talk more about assessment next week, so we'll probably visit this in more depth next week. But assessment is not supposed to measure citizenship skills. Assessment is supposed to communicate to an observer the extent to which the student has mastered the material. Are you? I don't know. You all may be too young to remember. You know who Ross Perot is? No. Well, he was a real rich guy. For those of you who don't know, he was a real rich guy that decided he wanted to be a politician, which worked for me fine. I thought it's fine if he wants to go into politics. But before he got around to being a politician, he decided to fix education, which I sure did hate that. I really wanted to encourage him to stick to being rich and let somebody else worry about education. But anyway, he had to get a finger in that pie. And one of the things that Ross Perot was concerned about was attendance. And so there was legislation passed that said if you have more than this many absences in a year, you fail that grade. Well, that doesn't make any sense to me. What if you just decided you were going to be a gymnast? We've had the Olympics, right, this year? We had the Olympics. Did you watch them? Ooh, I think they're so exciting. Well, anyway, you decided you wanted to be a gymnast. So you went to, what's his name? Paroli? What's his name? The Russian? Karoli. I knew Petroli wasn't quite right. You went to Bella Karoli and you joined the Olympics, and so you missed 3 months of the 5th grade being a gymnast. And what if you took your TOKS test at the end of the year at the 5th grade, and you made an exceptional on all the TOKS objectives, and you took the Metropolitan Achievement Test and you scored in the 7th grade the 2nd month? Should you fail the 5th grade? Do you want that little girl in your 5th grade classroom next year who already knows all the 5th grade curriculum, whose score on the achievement test is already in the 7th grade, who's already passed the TOKS objectives? Doesn't make any sense to me. You would retain a student in the 5th grade if you believed that retaining the student would result in their learning the 5th grade curriculum next year, right? Probably if you made a decision about this youngster's placement, you ought to just put her in the 7th grade. Because for all intents and purposes, she's already learned most of the curriculum that she needs to know from the 6th grade. Does that make sense to you? I actually would probably just put her right on in the 6th grade with all of her friends. But that's actually happening to a girl I know right now. She is not a gymnast. She's a barrel racer. And she's missed enough days of school that she's ready, a senior in high school, and has already passed everything as a straight A honor student. But she's passed so many grades, they're going to punish her by not letting her graduate. Really. They're going to make her come back and do it again. And that just doesn't make sense to me. I think it's a terrible indictment in our school system that a student can miss half the time and not miss anything. To me, that report card is on the school. The student passed the report card in my mind. The report card is on the school. What were they doing that she didn't miss? You see, because she's already met all the benchmarks that they've set. These are just things for you to think about because they come into play where homework is concerned. Yes, Brianna?
They just want money.
Well, I have a feeling you're probably right.
Because my high school, I could have graduated a year early, but they, because I was done with everything, but they wouldn't let me graduate a year early because they get money for every senior that stays. So they made me graduate just a semester early because if I stayed a semester longer, they got so much money.
And you probably weren't causing them much trouble.
Sort of. After that, I did.
Well, it's bad psychology, in my view. I just, our schools are overcrowded as it is. I mean, you'd think that they wouldn't miss one more. But it does have to do, attendance does have to do with the average daily attendance record and the extent to which schools are reimbursed for students. And certainly most students can't succeed unless they're in school a big part of the time. And as far as life training is concerned, I think it's extremely important that students go to school and are there on time and stay in school. I do believe that. And one of the 7 of the 12 years I was in school, I never missed a day. Never.
How many days can they miss?
Well, 2 weeks, 10 days, I think. Huh?
90% of the school year you have to attend.
Well, there's 180 days in the school year, so 90% of that would be 18 days. 10% would be, you could miss 18 days. Isn't that right? Yeah, basically. 10% of 180 days is 18 days, and 10% minus 100% leaves you your 90% attendance, so you could miss 18 days. 15 days? Well, there was a state law to that effect, and maybe they've become liberal about it now. I don't know. But in any event, I'm really speaking out of both sides of my mouth because I think it is very important for children to be on time and to be where they're supposed to be, because that's how they learn to hold down a job and have training for later in life. And one of my children never missed one single day in elementary school, so I didn't take my kids out of school unless they were almost dead. I mean, a fever was a prerequisite for sure, and usually they had to be having a fever and throwing up at the same time, because for one thing I needed to go to work. But for another thing, I don't think it's a value to kids to learn to be sick about every little thing every time you don't want to do something. I mean, I think you have to, going and participating, if you sign up, you meet your obligations of going and doing when you're supposed to be there. On the other hand, if someone misses that, the consequence for missing should be a reasonable consequence. And to me, it isn't repeating a grade if in fact you've already mastered the material. In any event, those are some of the help skills for that. Be sure you're consistent in collecting and grading using whatever criteria you decide on. Coordinate assignments with other teachers so that you determine that there is a fair and equitable distribution of homework assignments. Usually when we have departmentalized schools, teachers alternate days that they give assignments and also days when they administer tests, so everything is not on the same day. Classroom incentives for completing work, to me, are much better than grading homework. Lots of incentives and fun games and things can be implemented to encourage kids to turn in their homework and help each other remember master and turn in their homework. Students need feedback on their homework, and it needs to be certain and it needs to be swift. Many years ago, there was a guy named Thorndike, and Thorndike discovered what is referred to as the law of practice. And what that means is when you practice something a certain way, you learn it that way. If it's wrong, you learn it that way. And if it's right, you learn it that way too. So if students are practicing their spelling words, and one of their spelling words is stole, and they practice writing stole, S-T-O-L-D, what they learn is the way you spell stole is S-O-L-T-D rather than S-T-O-L-E. It's hard to spell when you don't have anything to look at. In any event, if you practice spelling words wrong, you learn them. Just because they're wrong doesn't mean learning doesn't occur. You learn what you practice. So it's very important that when we assign youngsters homework, they know how to do it so they're executing this practice properly, because when they execute the practice improperly, there's still learning still occurs. And basically what they're learning is that they're learning to do it wrong rather than learning to do it right. But learning is there anyway. So that's about homework. Now, the same goes with projects. When you assign projects for students, make sure they're within the capability level of the students to whom they're assigned. This is the same with class expectations. Be sure there are roles in there. Remember when we watched the tape with Jackie, how they found the Jackie and the Pitt group assignment, how they found the geography task of locating Ohio or Indiana or whatever it was that Jackie could do. So we need to clearly state the expectations, make sure they're fair and reasonable for everyone. Post homework assignments on a website if it's possible. And remember above all else that there's very little empirical evidence to indicate that homework really increases student achievement in the grades that precede high school. So these are all important elements from Chapter 11. Now we're going to take up for the last half of Chapter 11 and our guided practice right after the break. So I'll see you in about 5 minutes. Thank you.